I
don't think so.
I don't believe so.
All right. So I posted the agenda in the chat for today. We have our welcomes and introductions, public comment, election of chair and vice chair, reviewing bylaws, procurement and public participation policies, and then upcoming meetings. So are there any adjustments or additions to the agenda? All right, hearing none, we will go ahead and move forward. So since we're still getting to know each other, even though we met before, we're going to go ahead and just do introductions. And I'll start. I'm Catherine Dimitrick. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest Regional Planning Commission, and I'll pass it over to Peter.
I am Peter Danforth. I'm District Manager for Lamoille County Conservation District. And I'll pass it to Dean.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dean Pierce. I am a senior planner at the Northwest Regional Planning Commission, and happy to be with you today. And I will pass it to Catherine Sonic.
Hi, I'm Catherine Sonic, and I am the planner for the town of Jericho. I'll pass it off to Lauren.
I'm Lauren Weston, and I am the district manager for the Franklin County Natural Resources Conservation District. I'll pass it to Steve.
Hi, everybody. Steve Libby. I'm executive director at the Vermont River Conservancy. And let's see, I'll pass it to Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Lally. I'm the zoning administrator in the town of Westford. I'm not sure who hasn't spoken yet. Maybe Jed?
Yeah, I'm having problems with my connection here. I don't know if people can hear me or not.
We can, Jed.
Pardon?
We can.
Yes, we can hear you. Just can't see you.
Okay, all right. Yes, I can hear you. So I'm Jed Pfeffer, and I'm representing the stewards of the Greensboro watershed.
Jed, we can only see the top of your head, so maybe if you pulled the computer down, might be able to see all of you.
Is that better or worse?
A little bit more.
Is that worse?
It's better.
And Megan, do you want to introduce yourself and then pass it on?
Sure, yeah. Megan Brodier, regional planner with Lamoille County Planning Commission. I'm just kind of listening in as a partner today, not an official council member. And let's see, has Lauren already gone?
This is Kent. I haven't gone, so I'll jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Kent.
Yeah, I'm the chair of the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain and representing a watershed organization today.
And does that leave Dick and Dea?
It leaves Dick anyway, yeah. It looks like my video might be frozen, but I'm Dick Off. I'm a member of the board of directors for the Lamoille County Planning Commission.
And I am Dea Dublin, and I work at the NRPC with Dean and Catherine on water quality.
Great, I think that's everybody. Wonderful. Is there any public comment for any items that aren't on the agenda? I think, Megan, you are a member of the public that's here. So feel free to jump in on any items as we go through the agenda.
Okay, thanks.
So first item we have for action is the election of the chair and vice chair. So the way we will do this is there will be nominations from the floor. Once we have our volunteers or identified. And so I'm just going to open up the floor to conversation and hear from folks that might be interested in serving as chair or vice chair, or ask Dean if he has any information on this to share.
In terms of information to share, I did trade emails with Sarah Had, and Sarah, sorry she can't be here today. She did indicate some willingness to serve, but not as chair, and did indicate she could perhaps be vice chair. So if that helps anybody in terms of nominating themselves or someone else to be the chair, understand that an experienced hand in the form of Sarah Had might be elected as the vice chair.
I'll remind people that the role of chair will not be super challenging because you will have a lot of support from the staff who you know, Dean and Daya. And so the job will largely be facilitating the meetings and just finalizing the agenda with staff in advance of the meetings. So it's not a huge lift for someone, and happy to be supportive if someone is willing to serve in that role. Lauren, you're the chair of the Missisquoi, is that right? Did I get that right, Dean?
That's
Yes,
correct. Sorry,
yes,
I went
you
to
did.
go find a dog that's being very quiet.
We appreciate you willing to serve in that role. I don't know if that gives anybody any ideas.
Okay, all right. Let me just. So if I just close this a second. Oh, okay, just carry it.
Peter, did I see you turning your mute off?
Well, I was just gonna comment on, I don't think Jed knew he was on audio. It's moving
It
around.
wasn't because you're interested in serving as chair of this body?
I could. I mean, that's not what I was shooting for today, but I'm willing.
Is there anybody else who is willing, or are people excited that Peter is?
I would nominate Peter.
I'll second the nomination.
So we have a nomination and a second for Peter as chair of Basin Water Quality Council for Lamoille Basin. All those in favor of that nomination, please say aye.
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 Is anyone opposed to that? Please say nay. And any abstentions? Peter, congratulations.
Thank you, I guess.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
We really appreciate it. And if we move forward with the draft bylaws, it's a 1-year term, so you can look up to training your replacement pretty quickly if it's a role you don't want to continue to serve in after 1 year. So thank you so much for stepping up, Peter. We really appreciate it. And as Dean noted, Sarah Had, who you met last time, who is the town manager for the town of Fairfax, has indicated an interest and willingness to serve as vice chair. So I'll make sure people know about that, and then ask if there's any others who might be interested in that role, and open the floor to nominations.
Thank you.
And Peter, you want to take it from here, or do you want me to keep facilitating?
You're doing a great job.
All right,
I
I'll
nominate
take it.
you to continue to facilitate.
All right, I'll do it for a couple more agenda items. So are there any nominations for vice chair?
If Sarah is willing to serve, I would be willing to nominate her.
I second that.
Thank you, Kent and Peter, for the nomination and second. So we have Sarah Had, the Fairfax town manager, who is nominated for vice chair. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? And abstentions? Wonderful. Sarah will return from vacation with the gift of being vice chair. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Sarah. I think it's really great to be moving to this next stage for the Basin Water Quality Council. Peter, just let me know when you want to jump in, or if you would like me to keep going.
Well, I think that since you have all the agenda in front of you and are more familiar, I'd say please continue.
All right.
And then I'll take on for the next meetings and
All right, that sounds
discuss
great.
with you. I'll discuss with you and Dean anything that we need to discuss, I guess,
Okay,
in the future.
that works. Great. So next on the agenda is to initiate the discussion of the bylaws and rules of procedure. And you all got a draft of that. And Dean, is this something that you have a brief overview of that you're giving?
Yeah, I have a slide on the screen that explains why the bylaws must be prepared. It is a section from the rules, or rather the contract that the QUISP has. I can also just give people an overview by sharing the table of contents of these draft bylaws. I wanted to say that some attempt is being made to have the bylaws between the different basin councils be somewhat similar. So if you were involved in the council for the Missisquoi, you will see that these proposed bylaws, or at least this starting point, is the same or very, very, very similar to those. But that doesn't mean that each council can't tailor the bylaws to their own particular needs and purpose. I'm going to be looking over at my screen here to hit on some of the high points with the bylaws, and then I'm going to open up the document, a Word version of the document that was shared, so that we can discuss the various sections. But if you've seen, I'm not going to say that if you've seen one set of bylaws, you've seen them all, but they do have some similarities. We start with the legal basis, the name, which should be fairly straightforward, I would think, although in the Missisquoi Bay Basin, we had some peculiar reasons for discussing that. The purpose, the membership, these are things that are established in statute and rule. The organizational structure, the leadership, essentially the officers, what the election process will be going forward, the duties of the officers, and some sections on meetings and procedure and conflict of interest. So if it's okay, and there are no questions, I'll simply open up that document and then we can talk about each of these sections in a bit more detail. Is that all right? I'm seeing a thumbs up, so. I'm going to. So the thing I will mention is that some of the pieces of the rules of the bylaws, I should say, were put in to stimulate discussion. Excuse me. And I'm hoping everybody can see them on the screen now. Whoops, I'm having an issue here, but I'm hoping everyone can see. Yes. Whoops.
It's just showing a black screen.
Yeah, black screen.
Okay, I'm gonna try again. How about now?
Nope.
Oh dear. Let's
It's
try one.
loading slowly, I think.
Well, I'm gonna try one more time. How about now?
Still loading, I guess.
Oh dear.
Dean, do you want me to share? I have it up.
Yes, please.
Sure.
And I will give you privileges in just a second. Apologies, folks, for that. I don't know why the internet gremlins are out today, but you can see on the screen the text. This is what was emailed. It does have some changes that were made in light of discussion at the Missisquoi Council, which I think would be helpful. But the legal basis is in state law, and that section is cited. The name of the council, I imagine, will be the Lamoille Basin Water Quality Council, which we will sometimes abbreviate BWQC or sometimes call the council. The purpose of these councils is to do the duties that are specified in state law and rule. The membership of the council is also set forth in state law, and it is a total of 9 members, at least initially. There are procedures for adding members. It does make things a little bit complicated, but it is possible. It does require some weighted voting. Something that I'm going to just mention in terms of membership, the Department of Environmental Conservation is suggesting that the initial appointees somehow be staggered so that the council doesn't face a situation where at the end of 2 years, there's a complete turnover in membership. That isn't something that has been fully fleshed out. There's nothing that I can propose to you today, but I just want the members to be aware of that. That is something that could be asked of the council in the future. In terms of voting, it is 1 person, 1 vote. And then you can see the next section on attendance is fairly straightforward. One question we would pose to you is, should there be or does there need to be any kind of mention of the process for alerting people to attend? So it's, we are proposing that if a member is appointed to the council and they do not indicate that they're unable to make a meeting, that's essentially an unexcused absence. If a person who is a member of the council has 2 unexcused absences, then the chair would contact the group that that member represents and explain that. But we also feel that that points to the need for members to know, well, who do they inform when they're unable to attend the meeting? So to date, people have responded to me to indicate that they can't make a meeting, and that could continue to be the practice, although some of you may prefer to have the chair notified. My recommendation is that if the council feels this is something that should be addressed in the bylaws, that you could have the information go to staff and staff would distribute that information. Any questions on that? I should also say, it's not our expectation that the council will get through this entire document today and take any action on it. We wanted to have an initial discussion today, and we are imagining that the conversation will continue at your next meeting, and possibly adoption would happen at the next meeting. But please don't be thinking that we're going to be ripping through this document and the whole document will need to be approved, because that's not the case.
Ken,
So,
Yeah, Dean, I have just a quick question. In that there's an alternate assigned to the seat that I occupy. Is it my obligation to notify that alternate as well as you if I cannot attend?
I wouldn't say that necessarily, but it hadn't been my thought that members would be responsible for notifying the alternate. But that could certainly be something that's discussed. I'm happy to hear any input on that, but it wasn't my thought that it would be the responsibility of someone who's unable to attend to contact the alternate. Does anyone feel like that should be the responsibility of the member? It could be.
I guess my understanding of the alternates is that we're supposed to be there anyway for the foreseeable future. I'm an alternate for Basin 5, and it was conveyed to me that I should be attending.
Yeah, alternates can't be forced to attend. But I think a lot of people realize that there's a benefit. The alternate could feel like, hey, it's to my benefit to attend because I'm learning stuff and getting up to speed. On the other hand, their responsibilities aren't as great as the full member. And so if they don't attend, I don't feel it's, a huge demerit, but yes, it's great if alternates can attend because they will be learning along everyone else, all of the new procedures and helping comment.
Are the alternates subjected to the same attendance rules as the members?
That wasn't the intention when we drafted this because of the fact they're alternates, not members. Any other thoughts or questions about? So section 404 really is proposed to make a group or sector, be it watershed organizations or land conservation organizations and so on, aware of a situation where someone isn't participating and they should be, but that's really all that it does. And I'm not hearing any objection to the idea that when someone informs staff that they're unable to attend, that's where their responsibility ends. It would be the responsibility of staff to contact the alternate to say, now, there's no harm in a representative who can't make a meeting letting the person know, but I just don't think that it needs to be their responsibility. So going on, anyone should be eligible to hold the office of I was going to say president, of chair and or vice chair. So if you're a member, you qualify. And then as we've been talking, there are provisions for alternates who can step in when a full member is unable to attend or is unable to vote. And perhaps picking up on what you were saying, Lauren, it is desirable to have alternates because of situations where a member cannot vote on a particular item. So if the agenda includes a vote that will pertain to a project that a member's organization is sponsoring, then the rules say that that member should not vote on that item. However, that member may answer questions, so it's kind of a qualified recusal. What happens to the vote? well, in that instance, the vote would be cast by the alternate. And if we were expecting motions to come up on the fly, and the conflict would only become clear that night, well, it does make things more challenging if there's no alternate there. So having alternates attend regularly can save us if we have a situation like that. There will be an alternate to step in. But I don't imagine that would happen very much. If going forward, there's going to be a vote on something that a particular member must recuse themselves from, we'll probably have an idea about that before the meeting, and we would let the alternate know that they should plan on attending because member X is going to have to recuse themselves because of an item on the ballot, or an item on the agenda. Is this clear? Okay, something else I wanted to mention that is going to be relevant, the last section or the last sentence of this section is reflecting the rules. It says alternate members shall be established at the meeting of the council and may be changed with reasonable prior written notice, etc. So that we understood that we would get as many alternates lined up as we could at the organizational meeting, and they were recognized. What isn't clear is what happens, say, next month or the month after that, if people step forward and want to be included as alternates. As I understand it, there are some folks who would want to be alternates added to the alternates list or pool. And we just have to reconcile whether or not that's going to be an issue, because the way things were understood is that alternates would be seated once at the beginning of the organization. But I think that we have to make some allowance for alternates being added after that initial meeting. And I'd be interested in hearing anything people had to say about that.
I absolutely agree. Getting alternates drummed up early was difficult on my end. But I think as we move forward, we have a better idea of who we are, and we explain that to who we want to as an alternate. I think it'll be easier to get that support.
Yeah, the wording as it's before you is open enough to, it's open to the possibility of alternates being recognized at a meeting other than the organizational meeting, I'll call it. So I believe that this wording would take care of the problem. And I just wanted to draw people's attention to it, that we had been operating on the assumption before that it would happen at the first meeting, and that's really just not practical. If there aren't any other comments or questions, and I'm not seeing hands, although I can't see them as well. Okay, Lauren, just the broader point, turnover of staff for all positions should be accounted for. Yes, that's another consideration that time is going to teach us. What do we do about people who have a position with an organization and they take another job? The membership is held by the person, and it's my understanding that that's the person who is the member. So when people are in a position as a member where they think they might be changing jobs in the next 2 years, it could be to their advantage to have someone else in their organization be an alternate, so that that person can become the representative when they leave. And I'm saying that based on the assumption that the rules or the bylaws could in fact give some preference to elevating an alternate to a full-time seat. It isn't spelled out here, but that is something that the council could think about, is to somehow give preference to an alternate to become a member. Does that make sense, or is that clear?
I guess that does get to the question of who holds the council seat. Is the organization or is it the staff person? And I think you said it's the staff person, even if they leave, which is seems like it could get complicated based on how quickly people are moving around jobs in the sphere I'm aware of, at least.
But none of you on the council are allowed to leave your jobs for the next 2 years. So we didn't tell you, but that's part of agreeing to serve on the council. But I think it is accurate that the seat is held by the individual. And so there will just need to be an appointment process to replace that person if they are to depart their position and are no longer in a place to serve.
Dean, where are you on the sections here? I don't know if we're I'm a little confused between what you're saying and what I'm looking at on the screen.
Okay, yeah, so I was at, it's just above, it's 406 alternates is where I was dawdling behind.
Okay.
Something that may contribute to this is the guidance that's being prepared by DEC on these matters. There is a overall guidance document, several chapters in it. One of those chapters is chapter 4, which deals with a lot of these things, and it may include clear guidance on these processes that basin councils can follow. So stay tuned on that, but that is some place that direction or advice may come from, both to Peter's point and to Lauren's point. So Kent has raised his hand.
A circumstance just popped into my mind. I'm just thinking, like, with my seat, if the Friends were to have a project to be approved, and I would anticipate presenting the project to the council, and I'm assuming that the alternate would take my seat, would it be for the day or just that one presentation? Does that need to be spelled out, or am I just splitting hairs here?
I don't think you're splitting hairs. My understanding would be that if someone, my understanding is that the member who has the conflict has that conflict for a particular motion, particular vote, and that's all that they have the conflict for, and that's all that they would need to step aside for. And it wouldn't be for the meeting as a whole. The council could consider making that the process, but I wouldn't understand why without some explanation. I would think that if you have an agenda, if there's a meeting and on that meeting agenda, there's a Friends of Northern Lake Champlain project, that's item 3, let's say, you announce that you're recusing yourself from the vote, but you'll be available to answer questions. An alternate steps forward and takes part in the vote, but then that item 3 is done, you no longer have to step aside, and then you're back in play, is how I understand it. I can't see why the person would be penalized in a sense and told that they can't participate in the rest of the meeting.
All right, so like my alternate is not in Friends, they're representing another organization, so
that works out well.
Okay, so they would have a vote. The alternate would have a vote, and probably ought to be explained to them ahead of time that this situation's coming up and they should make themselves available. Is that okay? Okay, I got it.
Right. Okay, so moving on, as we said, organization officers are limited to the chair and vice chair. And we've already been through the reality of, until there's a chair and vice chair, meetings are presided over by someone like Catherine, or in fact, Catherine. We're suggesting that the councils might want to have committees at some point in the future. We think the bylaw should allow for it. We didn't differentiate between standing committees or committees that would be created for particular tasks and then would go away. We just wanted to have a placeholder for committees because we think that it's likely that the council will need them. If there are no questions or comments about that, the support, administrative and staff support, will come from the Clean Water Service Provider, which is the Regional Planning Commission. Elections, we are suggesting that elections could be handled a couple of different ways. One would be informally, the way that it was done where nominations are made from the floor. We just wanted to give grist for the mill and have the group discuss whether or not you might want a nomination process. And I guess I'll leave it at that and see if there are any questions or comments. At the Missisquoi Basin meeting, there was at least one person who spoke from the point of view that nomination committees can be helpful to smooth the election process, determining who, work on cultivating people's interest and things like that, so that you're not facing a situation where no one is really prepared to serve or to nominate themselves, or that sort of thing. There are reasons to have nominating committees, but it does formalize the process a bit more. If no one has anything to say about this today, then I would be happy to hear any thoughts between now and the next meeting on what the text should say in the version that we propose.
Any initial thoughts about this question, whether nominations from the floor or nominating committee would be better?
Well, my gut instinct is just to go with nominations will take on the floor at the annual meeting, but I'm new to this, so we'll see. Maybe we should mill it over a bit.
Yeah, definitely a million over. Thanks, Peter. And Dick, did you want to offer a comment too?
Yeah, is there any way to just leave it as an or? I mean, it's not a problem today, so can we just leave it as is and solve it when it's a problem?
Yeah, we would want to change the shall to a may in the second portion of that, or change it to be written in a way that is may, but it does. Yeah, I guess that would end up making it more the, it's really going to be determined by the chair what the process will be.
That's an interesting suggestion, Dick, to mull over and think about how to make that work.
Anyone else?
I feel like this should be one of those standard things across all of the books.
The use of nominating committees, that's a good point.
Yeah, whether or not we use them, whether or not, like how a chair is elected, I feel like maybe should be standard. Just an idea.
Yeah, I'm thinking that could be a comment on the guidance document when that comes out. Yeah, I've only had the experience with the Missisquoi Basin folks who talked about this and this group here to know what the other councils may be thinking. Okay, so terms of office, as Catherine mentioned, these are one-year terms of office for the officers, which are different from the two-year initial terms, 2+ year initial terms of the council members and alternates. That is indicated in rule. We are suggesting for discussion the final paragraph, rather, the final sentence in the paragraph. Council members may serve as officers for a maximum of 3 consecutive terms. This is something that we thought would stimulate some discussion, so we're interested in hearing. Any thoughts?
I feel like that might come into an issue. I'm on 3 different councils right now, and if I'm being asked to serve for 3 more years, and then like 3 councils won't have a person, I guess, at that 3-year point. So I like the idea of consecutive terms, but it makes me worried about like literal logistics of who can serve in these positions, especially for like the NRCDs, who they're like, there's a couple staff at each one. There isn't like a large pool to be drawing from.
Yeah, well, and keep in mind, this is only in terms of they're serving as officers, not as members. So
that's on me. I read that wrong.
Okay. Any other thoughts people have about this?
I'll
Seems
just
pretty
add.
straightforward.
Go ahead, Peter.
No, I just say it seems pretty straightforward. I would leave it.
Okay. I'm a big proponent of term limits for officers. I'll just say, I think it makes it easier for people to say yes when they're asked to serve, and then it ensures a sharing of leadership among members in a way that doesn't have to be rude. So I'm a big proponent of it. So, but definitely these are your rules of procedure. So my opinion actually doesn't matter.
Just one more thought. If you're like vice chair for 2 years and then you become chair 3rd year, is that 3 years?
It would be 3 years in each position. So you could be 3 years, up to 3 years vice chair, and then up to 3 years as chair.
Okay.
3 years for any given position.
That might, I think, just if we could spell that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good question, because I think the sentence doesn't read as clearly as it should to reflect that. Because we knew what it meant. So that's how we read it.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. It would, we will change that to make it clear that they may serve as an individual officer for a maximum of 3 years, but may move up. Okay, so vacancy section 604, this is simply indicating that if the chair moves away, the vice chair becomes the chair until the next time that the vacancy is filled. And that would mean at the, since these are 1-year terms at that election. And that's pretty straightforward. There's no special election called, in other words.
So let's say your chairs at one organization, they leave, their alternate backfills their membership position. They don't backfill the officer position, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Anyone else? The duties of the council members are established under the law and the rule, but we are suggesting that members should keep the sectors or the groups of folks who they represent informed. So we're suggesting that they make periodic reports back to those they represent. It is written as a duty. I know that at least one other person in a different basin had questioned me about this. It may be something that people feel can't be required, but it seems like a very good idea to us, so we're suggesting it in the text. The chair, as we've got it here, guides the planning and facilitation of the meetings in coordination with the QUISP, and does other duties that are customary to being the chair. And they can cast a vote or will cast a vote if they wish to step aside or if they have a conflict of interest, but it's generally promoted that the chair will vote. It's not a situation, in our view. The councils are not bodies that we feel the chair steps aside unless they have to break a tie vote. That's the bottom line. The last sentence in this section is something that we have included and we do feel is important. There are certain actions that the councils must take. The councils must establish priorities for projects and so on that are required of it, but there may be other things that the councils decide that we feel should be decided as much as possible by a consensus approach. And we're not spelling out the specific consensus building approach, but we think that they wouldn't necessarily require formal voting in every instance. So that's what we have proposed in the section on the chair. If there are,
I see you have a hand up.
I'm sorry, I'm a little bit slow on the trigger here, and I'd like to go back to section 701 regarding the periodic and annual reports. And I'm assuming that the minutes of our meetings are public information, and it would be appropriate if I'm addressing a group that I could make those minutes available. Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Yep,
And on that point, the minutes are on the council section of the Regional Planning Commission's web page. So if you go to the NRPC webpage, you can find a series, or go to the NRPC site, you will find a series of pages relating to the work of the Clean Water Service Provider and the council, and that includes a link to the agendas and to the minutes. So those resources will always be there for you to refer people to or to grab a copy of if you don't have them someplace else.
I'd just like to say what an excellent source they are, because I took a look and it really is an excellent source, and I'm sure my organization will really appreciate that. So well done.
Thanks, Ken. In the absence of the chair, the vice chair serves. We've discussed that. It says in absence or incapacity. We certainly hope no one is incapacitated. So Peter, no skydiving or things like that.
Well, the ski season's over, so danger is limited now.
Okay.
Maybe we should also add recusal, because there's potentially instances, for example, if Peter is a project sponsor, where he will have to recuse himself. Maybe we should just add recusal there.
Yeah, I had a question about that. So if I recuse myself, I imagine I would automatically go to the vice chair to continue the discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Ken.
Good points. What, did Ken have his hand up again? Sorry.
No, just forgot to lower it.
Oh, okay. So meetings, we have included in the bylaws that the council shall meet at least 4 times a year. That comes from rule. We will meet when there is a time and place that's determined by the chair and the QUISP. We're operating under the assumption that we will lock in a regular meeting time and date when it makes sense. We're not sure that it makes sense to lock in that time right now when we're meeting monthly, essentially. When the council's work slows down to the point where it could meet less than monthly, then that's when it makes sense to lock in the regular meeting times. And we will have to notify the meetings a bit more extensively because they'll be special meetings. But the rule says the councils will meet at least 4 times per year. We suspect that in the first year, you will be meeting much more than that. Whether or not you end up going to 4 times a year or something more like every 2 months remains to be seen. And we think we will have a little bit better idea of that as the summer goes, as we go through the summer and look to the fall. If for some reason there is the need for a special meeting, and I'm not sure at the present time what that would be for, but they can be called, and the chair could call the special meeting, or if something happened to the chair, if 5 or more council members, a quorum of the members decide that there needs to be a special meeting, then one will be called. Okay. We are on a fiscal year basis that it lines up with the state. So the annual meeting is the first one for the fiscal year. So we're looking at July to June. Notice is in accordance with the open meeting law, which many of you heard the presentation by Catherine at the last meeting. Minutes will be the responsibility of the QUISPs, and we will make them available according to law, and that includes through the website. And as we've said, quorum is 5 members. Okay.
Dick, I see you have your hand up.
What is the purpose of the annual meeting?
It would be to elect the officers.
Okay, but we just have elected officers, so so there's a little bit of a conflict about the 2 years or the 1 year span for the officers, and when they will be reelected. Oh,
Well,
new slate.
Yeah. So one of the things, and this is similar to Catherine's point, that things in our mind that are not expressly stated, there's language in rule and in some of this developing guidance that talks about this first year being different. So as I was saying earlier, you have 2-year terms. No, they're really 2 years plus, because these first few months leading up to the start of the fiscal year are essentially freebies. I had in my mind that it would be the same with the chair and the vice chair, and that the election of the chair and the vice chair doesn't have to be redone in July, let's say, that the elections of the officers that we've just had are for these months up to July, and then the year will go by and those people will remain in office. However, that wasn't stated. So the group should discuss whether or not it would be necessary or meaningful to have another round of elections in July. I think not, but when Peter, Peter, were you thinking you'd have to stand for re-election in July?
No, I don't know.
Thanks, Dick, for
Lauren, you have any feedback on that, being chair?
I feel like I signed up for fiscal year 23 when I said yes, so
Yeah.
I think you did too, bud.
And I'm glad you raised that question, Dick, and that's when the BWQC chooses to adopt these rules of procedure, that, effective date of certain sections can be made clear in the adoption of the rules, so that that timing question of the year terms can be addressed clearly in the record, in case anybody forgets.
So yes, thank you for those good comments. We're here at Article 9, as mentioned. We are not expecting to get through the whole document. We are looking at covering some other agenda items. This might be a good place to stop and have a quick break for folks, and then come back and resume the meeting by discussing procurement. And then perhaps I can figure out some of my Zoom issues between now and then. What do people think about having a break now and coming back in say 5 minutes at 10:03 and resuming with discussion of procurement? Or would you
Let's
like
be
to keep
generous
going?
and call it 10:05, Dean.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll see you then. This is super. If you've never gotten into the details and the rabbit holes of procurement, I'll warn you in advance. It's just a super exciting topic. Lots of twists and turns and mysteries. So hold on to your seats. It's going to be a wild ride. It's on to you, Dean.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. And I'm hoping that I have solved my screen sharing problem.
Yes, we can see. And
Okay.
for those of you who don't speak sarcasm, I should note that that was sarcasm.
Yes, that was an introduction that I wasn't sure I was going to manage to live up to, because the procurement requirements that are imposed on the QUISPs are what I would say are less than ideal. We wish they were simpler, but for the time being, they are not going to be as simple as we would like them. And we're going to try to make the best of a bad situation. The purpose of this discussion or presentation is really going to focus on this slide, is to explain that we're doing things the way we're doing them because we are told we have to do them this way. The reasoning behind them is, the reasoning behind procurement requirements is that since we're using public funds, we need to have requirements in place that will ensure we spend those funds wisely, efficiently, and without any kind of preference towards any particular firm. So that means process. The slide indicates that the Clean Water Rule spells out that the clean water service providers shall have a procurement policy for procuring goods and services. And as I've said, the Regional Planning Commission has had a procurement policy in place for many years. However, that procurement policy hasn't had all the things in it that it would need to have in it for smooth and quick operation in the QUISP and BWIC process. The rule says that the policy, the procurement policy that the Regional Planning Commission as the QUISP will have, shall outline the procedures that the QUISP will follow when subgranting and subcontracting, and when the QUISP implements a project directly. Now, I wanted to just explain that by saying that the Regional Planning Commission serves as the QUISP. There are some projects that it might do itself, although that will be the exception much more than the rule. But the idea is that the rules for procurement would apply to us as well if the Regional Planning Commission is implementing a project directly, which, as I said, is not likely. Because of some specific things in the rule that have to do with the partner organizations, we needed to adjust the Regional Planning Commission's procurement policy, period. We needed to make adjustments for that. Otherwise, we might have been able to use our existing policy pretty much as is. But because there is this special allowance, I'll call it, for the QUISP partners or the council partners, we will have to make edits to our policy. I'm going to just stop there, take a breath, and see, are there any initial questions on this first paragraph? We must have policies in place. We have one. It doesn't have all of the things in it we need for QUISP. We will add them, and the rules will apply to us as well. Any questions about that so far? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So one of the things that is found in procurement policies, and it's done by organizations that work with agencies like the Department of Environmental Conservation and the Agency of Transportation, is pre-qualification. And the rules specifically address pre-qualification but it does things a little bit differently from some other agencies. So this is one of the things that we will have to adjust. The purpose of qualification is noble. It's desirable. It will help us accomplish our goals in a way that is a bit more efficient, where we can take parties, and they can be organizations or vendors of a service, and pre-qualify them. We can say, you do a particular type of work, you meet certain basic requirements, so you will be pre-qualified, and that will allow you to do work without repeatedly subjecting you to an evaluation process on an ongoing basis. So that's a good thing. Pre-qualification is a good thing. And the rule talks about pre-qualification for subgrantees, which, to just make it clear, would be organizations like Friends of Northern Lake Champlain, like the Resources Conservation Districts, land trusts, and organizations like that. Subcontractors would more likely be engineering firms, contracting firms, and folks like that. How do we do pre-qualification? We would do pre-qualification through what is called the request for qualifications process. I think most people are familiar with that, but the Regional Planning Commission would issue a request for qualifications, and it is like what it sounds like. We would ask for partners to give us a statement of their qualifications to serve as subgrantees, and the same thing for contractors, the statement of their qualifications to serve as contractors. And then they would be pre-qualified if they meet the requirements, and they would have that status for 3 years. So again, the goal is a good one, a noble one, and will help simplify the process once they've achieved it. So the rules say the QISP have to have pre-qualifications for subgrantees and for subcontractors. Once you are approved for 3 years. Oh, and by the way, the QISP must open up that process once per year. So if there happens to be a new partner organization created, then they would have the opportunity to be to submit their qualifications and be considered. Same thing for a new engineering firm that comes on the scene or a new contractor. They would have an opportunity to pre-qualify, get that status, and hold that status for 3 years. So that is a little bit on pre-qualification and what it is that we will need to do and the procedures that we will need to follow. Any questions on that?
I actually have a question. This is pretty standard language, as far as how we've been working with DC in general. Although sometimes we get into situations, say, our organization is subcontracted, and then we subcontract a contractor, who in turn subcontracts another contractor, and that can kind of get lost. So if I subcontract an engineering firm and then they look for help from another engineering firm, they almost follow the same procedures. Is that the engineering firm that is being subcontracted by the engineering firm that I subcontracted, do they have to go through the same process of being vetted?
It has to be a competitive process, and as I understand it, the requirements pass through. So a couple of points that I wanted to make that might address your question or the concern that could be behind it. We understand that if you have hired an engineering firm at an early stage of a project, that engineering firm can stay with that project and not have to be reevaluated. So a firm, once it's identified with a project, can stay with a project. That's not directly answering your question.
Right.
But ideally, your engineering firm would they would get involved with the project with their team identified. so that it's known and the qualifications of that team can be established from the get-go, and it is an efficient process from that point on. An element of the procurement that we hope to follow is that as many firms as we can get pre-qualified, we will get pre-qualified, and that they will be, they'll have that designation. And if you, as a sub-grantee, use one of the pre-qualified engineering firms on our list, you have nothing extra special to go through. So there's an incentive for us to try to get as many engineering or whatever service provider firms pre-qualified as possible, at least as far as pre-qualification is concerned. But I haven't got to the third paragraph, but the third paragraph is that pre-qualification only gets you so far. There is still a requirement that you would have, you solicit 3 cost estimates for the work. And I think that's something that you've encountered before, but as long as you have those pre-qualified firms and you go to them and you get 3, so your engineering firm that maybe has an unanticipated need for a specific skill would want to go to 3 pre-qualified firms and solicit cost estimates and then choose one, and then they would be okay.
I don't think that is, I think we're going to need to follow up on that because I don't think that's accurate. I think that the procurement requirement only follows through to the sub-grantee. And there's a difference between a sub-grantee and a subcontractor. I don't think the procurement follows through to the subcontractor, which would be the engineering consulting firm. That's my understanding. I've learned through this process that my understanding of procurement and DEC's understanding of procurement don't always align. So we will follow up on that question, Peter.
I hope you're correct, Catherine, because it gets really, it just drags the process on when the subcontractor has to bid on something that you've already kind of established. And
right. And so I think that there are many things that pass through, like non-discrimination and those things, but I don't think that that sort of process thing does.
Yeah. So and that if it's not too soon, brings me to the third paragraph. And
I'm sorry, Steve. Steve had it. Steve wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of emphasize what Peter was saying, that I mean, we do river corridor easements. We have a team that we use of lawyers and surveyors and people like that. And you know, we couldn't do it if we had to go out and get 3 bids from subcontracts that we use. But I guess I would, well, you guys figure that out, but I think it might be in the pre-qualification process where I think someone mentioned you could pre-qualify a team perhaps. That might work for us. But to go out and have to pre-qualify every time we're hiring an attorney wouldn't work for us.
Yes. And so hopefully my screen just flashed, and I hope that it doesn't mean that you can no longer see the screen. Can you still see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the language and rule that was driving my thinking earlier is what's highlighted here. It says, except for entities that have been selected, that would be the sub-grantees whose project is, well, let me start again. In the third paragraph, except for entities that have been selected pursuant to part is the partners, okay? And whose clean water projects have been selected by the council. That means it has to be pursuant to a vote of the council. The council will have had to say that a project is a good project and is high enough priority project to be funded. Except for those, procurement of services or its subgrantees shall be by a competitive process. So yes, there could be a situation where a partner has a project that has been to the council and has been given a high priority and has been voted the funding, that you would not have to have a competitive process, okay? But until that's happened, it says the subgrantee shall be a competitive process with a solicitation of quotations from at least 3 qualified entities. So we may get into a chicken and egg situation. You may not be ready to go forward with that project and know who your team is and who's going to work on it until it's been funded or it's been approved by the council. So that's why I'm saying, in some cases, you will want to know who your team is, but if it hasn't received the high priority vote and approval by the council, it wouldn't qualify for the exception. So anyway, that's the reasoning I had for saying what I said before. Perhaps it will be simpler. We're hoping that it will be simpler. We will do the best we can to make it as simple as we can.
And I think, Steve, the short answer to your concern is whatever your agency has done for procurement will need to meet the minimum requirements that are in the rule for the Clean Water Service Provider procurement standards. Because as a subgrantee, those get passed down.
Okay, when we worked with DEC in the past, and we work with, a lot, they basically say you use your own procurement policy, right?
Yeah.
And we submit, we have to do some submittals of info, but it's, I think this, I know this is a tricky thing, but I think spending the time to figure this out with everybody, and this is one of those issues that I brought up with Dean about if all the QUISPs are following the same procedures here, it's going to be much easier for groups like ours, like VRC, who want to work in all these basins to be consistent in how we're working in the contracting end of things. So, but I think this procurement question, as I understand, as I'm trying to understand it, it's an important one to figure out. So
it's very important. And as Dean noted in the beginning, it's not as simple as we would like it to be. We've also had the same experience in the past with DEC, that we simply utilize our existing procurement policies, which meet all of the state and federal standards. Unfortunately, there was a decision to put additional requirements in the rule that don't exactly align with, because they add additional requirements to the normal state and federal guidelines. So this is set up a system where we have to do something a little different than what our existing procurement policies have. And it is my understanding that does pass on to the subgrantees as well. So we'll need to really be careful. I agree, Steve, about implementing this in a way that is as simple as possible with the cards we have been dealt.
Yeah, thanks. Okay.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, the strategy that I and other QUISP planners have thought about with this is to cast the net as far as we can and get as many different subcontractors pre-qualified so that it's a non-issue, so that if we can make the process a simple one, straightforward, and the answer to the question, are they pre-qualified, is yes, then our lives will be simpler. And we're talking about ways that can be done. We're not sure that there can be a single RFQ issued that would handle all of the QUISPs, but that's one possible approach. We're talking about different ways to try to make it the answer to the question, are they pre-qualified? Yes, that's what we're trying to do. So just to step back a little bit, I've got a couple of graphics to share here. We do envision there being separate requests for the partner organizations or the subgrantees and contractors, because their responsibilities or their approaches and work is a little bit different. So we would have a specific RFQ for the partners. We would have specific criteria that are associated with them, and they would be evaluated. They would be selected, and we would document that. And that once they are on board, there is a simpler process to actually get money to them. That would be a task order process. It's not really that different when it comes to subcontractors. We would have an RFQ. Again, we hope the pool is very, very big. We want to have a specific evaluation or an evaluation that is specific to subcontractors. We want to document, and there would be task evaluation. This is where it's going to be a little bit different, because rather than kind of a blanket approval of the organization, it will have to be the indications from DEC that we are getting is that it has to be something specific. The task that's given to the subcontractor has to be stated specifically. So it's not like we can give them a generic task and then they can do whatever it is following. They have to be given a specific task and qualified on that. And then the task orders can be issued. So
the other difference between the two procurement routes is for partners, once you're pre-qualified, if you are the project sponsor, you are the presumed implementer, and we can, as the QUISP, contract with you without any further evaluation. For the contractors, among the pre-qualifieds, we will have to seek bids for specific projects and tasks. So there will be 3 bids sought from among the pre-qualified contractors. So that's the other difference. Once you're a partner and you're pre-qualified, if you're a project sponsor, you're in. If you are a contractor, you still have to submit a bid before you're selected.
okay, so if that is enough on pre-qualification for folks now, one of the things that I'm realizing that I didn't touch on before the break was approval of the minutes.
Yes, I was going to bring that up when you were done, because Daya reminded me.
Yes, so thank you. So that is something that I'm going to just try to share momentarily.
So did everybody get an opportunity to review the minutes? I know Kent did. Were there any corrections or changes to the minutes? If there are none, I would accept a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, all in favor of accepting the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? And abstentions? Wonderful. Thank you for making such quick work of that.
Okay. I feel I must just interject that in the next version of the minutes that we draft, we will have a statement at the top that indicates that if there were some edits to be made, we wouldn't go back and change the minutes that are posted on the website, that the corrections would be noted in the minutes for the meeting today. But thank you. Going back to where we were before, the next topic is the public participation policy. And this is something that the public engagement section of the Clean Water Rule says that the QUISPs must have. You can read it, but we are being told by rule that we will have a public participation policy that at a minimum shows that we have given proper public notice of meetings, decisions, and actions. So that means we would have to post the agendas in accordance with the open meeting law. Less straightforward, I suppose, is a requirement that the public participation policy that the QUISPs practice promote public participation in an open And the language is competitive and transparent process for identifying and selecting clean water projects with specific consideration given to minority, limited English proficiency, and socioeconomically disadvantaged communities and stakeholders. So this is language and rule that the QUISPs are asked or told to follow. And then the third piece of that is that we have a public participation policy that complies with the agency's non-discrimination policy. So we can't discriminate in our public participation efforts. There is a draft guidance document that I've mentioned a couple of times before that says that the councils and the QUISP should at all times implement their grants in a manner that promotes the mission of securing a clean water advancement while considering equity and inclusivity. So the sum total of all this is that this requirement for public participation that is, I'll call it broad and inclusive, has led us to propose a participation policy that would be adopted by both the council and the QUISP. And our thinking is that this is a task that could take many, many months to do well, but it would make sense to adopt on an interim basis and recognize that it's something that we would be revisiting. So this was in the packet. It has the policy, it lists some proposed practices that would help implement that policy, and then indicates that this is something that is adopted and on an interim basis and would be refined over time. Did anyone have any questions or thoughts about that? And again, this is something that we would like to get people's exposed to at this meeting and then bring it back for possible adoption at the next meeting.
It's a lot there. I guess if we all as partners and officers could, know how to work towards this in a comprehensive and unified way, that would be helpful. I mean, we all have our different regions. And, we do try to do this work in general, reaching out to, as many people as we can. I just, it's a big thing. It's a big mission. And any sort of advice or help or training towards that would be helpful.
Yeah, it is a big item, and that's why it's on the agenda at this meeting rather than just kind of pushing it off for a later one. You mentioned training, Peter, and I will use that as an opportunity to say that training opportunities is something that we've talked about a little bit before, and I'll show you a rough schedule that will maybe indicate when some additional training will take place. DEC is working on training for QUISP staff and for members of council, and that is also including this topic area. Catherine, given the Regional Planning Commission has been doing work on this area for the last few months, and it's going to be continuing it for several more, do you want to add anything about how this could translate to the councils?
Yeah, I think there's two things in regards to your question, Peter. One is that one of the reasons why Dean set this up as an interim policy is because we recognize that we should have real discussion at the Basin Water Quality Council level about what it means for, let's just say, identifying and compensating community connectors. What does that mean in practice, and how do we actually do it? And so those are the types of conversations we need to have about how to operationalize these ideals. But we thought it was important to at least get the ideals out there and then talk about, like, how do we actually make that happen? And what does that actually mean in terms of our day-to-day work? What do we keep doing? What do we do differently? What do we need to do that we're not doing now? And then the second piece is that the Regional Planning Commission as a whole is doing work in equity and inclusion. We just adopted a statement to guide our work with Daya's assistance. And so we'll be sharing that with all the committees that are kind of under the umbrella of the Regional Planning Commission, and we'll be developing a broader public participation plan that applies to the Regional Planning Commission. And pieces of that may or may not be adopted by the BWQ, but it could certainly serve as some guidance and inspiration. So that's kind of happening concurrently with what the BWQ is needing to do.
Okay. Yeah, and then, of course, the districts too have developed work groups around diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think we're finally getting back to that conversation. We just had a year-long survey done of our organizations by this University of Michigan on what we could be doing better. And that's going to be presented to us soon. And so I think we should make sure that we, as organizations, connect all those dots together as we move forward. And so I'll be sure to bring whatever developments we have with our organization to the board.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be lots of opportunities like that to learn from each other about what everyone's working on. It's great.
Anyone else before we move on?
Dean, this is Megan. I guess I just had one thought. I mean, we have been posting all the meeting notices that you send on our website, just under the kind of generic meeting section. And we do forward them to, like the town clerks or the town managers, administrators, to make them aware. But I'm just wondering, for further outreach, since a lot of people don't necessarily know like where to go to find the minutes and find the meeting postings, is there some kind of like generic blurb we can put in like a newsletter, or kind of get the word out there better? Or maybe some of like the RBCs and the conservation districts should have something on their web page that directs back to, say, your QUIS page, for example.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. And we can start to work on that blurb.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, dealing with these multi-regional organizations, I mean, the watersheds make sense from a standpoint of planning and trying to address the water quality problem, but they are not necessarily easy to overlay with public notice and communities and things like that. So it's a challenge. But having a standard blurb is a great idea. We'll get on that. Anyone else?
I see Lawrence noted that she likes the interim approach, and that she's noted that in the chat. Well, so as Dean mentioned, that both of these things will be on the agenda for next meeting as well. We can continue to review the rules of procedure and then think about where you are with adopting either one of those. If you have comments or thoughts between now and the meeting, please feel free to send them along to Dean, and he'll give you all a little nudge just in case you have some, because that will make our meeting time a little more efficient as we're trying to wrap up both of those policies that will need to be adopted by the Basin Water Quality Council. So stay tuned for more, but please feel free to send your thoughts to Dean in the interim. So our final agenda item that we have is scheduling and what's to come. And it looks like you're all ready to talk about that, Dean.
Yes, and I have included this chart. It's subject to change, of course, but there are the two policy items that we've been talking about today that we expect will continue at your May meeting and perhaps would be resulting in a vote to adopt. Bylaws, public participation. There are some other potential items that we will be talking with Peter about in terms of how much we can actually get accomplished at the next agenda. One thing we would like to propose is that each meeting have a section on it where a partner can talk about their organization and a project. And so that the meeting would feature that organization and or project at that meeting, and that the next meeting, a different partner organization and project would be featured. We're also thinking that there's a requirement for the QUISPs to develop guidance materials for the partners, and that material may be in a form at the next meeting where the council could react to it. I'm not certain of that, but that's something that is being worked on that would have to do with how will partners participate in the process. So that is something. Another suggestion has been made for the tactical basin planners to make a presentation so that council members can understand what the tactical basin plans say, particularly the implementation table of those. And I've been in touch with the basin planners, and we just would need to make sure that that can be scheduled. Danielle, by the way, is sorry, she had to be in the field today and she was not able to attend. And then there's one other item that is probably expendable or could be delayed. Just wanted to throw out the possibility that the council might want to have some kind of one-year work plan or a set of objectives for the coming 12 months. There are so many things that the council will need to do that are in response to DEC requirements that it may not be something that you really do fully in the first year, but you would do in subsequent years. But it may be helpful for the council to set its own agenda in some way and identify its, say, top 3 or 5 or whatever objectives, so that you can feel some sense of control over your own lives and schedules. I did want to mention training. There are training opportunities that are being worked on. I have a link on this slide to a training page that DEC has created. It's on the DEC website. I've also sent this out by email. We anticipate that in June, there could be training on the project application process, or perhaps that could start. There may be some quiz specific training that is happening in June. And in July, the DEC is talking about training on operation and maintenance and prioritization. But then relevant to our discussion earlier, they are talking about a training having to do with indigenous perspectives in July. As far as the council schedule, we anticipate that in August, it might be a month off, and then meetings would resume in September, perhaps on an every other month basis. So that's a look ahead. If there are any questions, please let me know or share them now.
And Lauren noted in the comments that it would be great to have other DEC staff come to a meeting to meet them, such as the river scientist, floodplain manager, etc., since partners will need to work with them closely. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and you're
flashing. Your screen keeps flashing.
Does it? Okay, I'm going to stop that then. Yes, there are DEC staff who are on the emails for this. And as I mentioned, some had indicated they couldn't, but I will double check to make sure that Stacy Pomeroy is on the list. I thought she was, but I'll confirm that. I know that some DEC folks were just wondering about holding back their participation so that the councils could feel that they weren't, being scrutinized. But I think that there are certain technical players that would be very helpful to have them as much as we can have them.
Any thoughts or comments about the schedule?
Not about the schedule, but just about that point. So in theory, the Basin Water Quality Council decides what the rules are for selecting projects and we go with it and we don't need any other person at DEC to stamp approval on it.
Not quite. Well,
Okay.
Oh, if it were to be.
I mean, there's language in the rules that talks about, I think once certain systems are set up, but there is a language in the rule that would suggest that the council will come up with a prioritization process. And when that prioritization process, the DEC will take a look and they'll say, okay, and then it can be applied. But it's not like there's no check-in with DEC, but there will be the setting up of procedures that once those are approved, they can be applied. If that's a modification of what I think you were just saying, because it's not as simple as the council. Yeah, it's not as simple.
Okay. I know
Also, go ahead.
Occasionally, the DEC staff can be less than responsive if you need approvals on things. And so just want to make sure that we build it systems that make it efficient for projects to move forward.
Agreed.
Yeah, so the project, project development, we haven't talked about a lot here because it's, but the time will come. The same kind of screening that's been necessary with projects in the past will still need to happen. So those are things that in many ways will happen before a project even comes to the council to know that it's a project. Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
I think I want to follow on what Lauren was saying. At what point, once the projects are ranked, at what point will, the clean water service provider have pretty much the control on saying, yep, let's go forward with this, and we don't have to go necessarily to the DEC because we've been given that ranking and we've been given that choice. Is there a point where we are sort of free of those reins?
Yeah, so I think of it this way. Think of the QUISPs will develop an application process. So some way for a project proponent to propose a project. The QUISP will be responsible for developing a list and preparing an initial prioritization of that list, and will present that initial prioritization to the councils, and the councils will check on that prioritization and do whatever they want with it. They may like it, they may hate it, but the council gets to prioritize it in some fashion. What I understand is that DEC is expecting the councils to have some kind of system for prioritizing. So that system for prioritizing, whatever we want to call it, will be reported to DEC, and DEC will be expected to give its feedback on it or approval of it. And from that point on, things are not in DEC's hands, they're in the QUISP and the council's hands. So that would mean the project application is made, the list is made and prioritized by the QUISP. The councils get it, they reorganize it, they decide what the final priorities are, and they vote on it. And the vote on that prioritization will result in the funding documentation that is needed for the dollars to flow.
That clarifies. Yeah, I think I understand now. Thanks.
And just, I forget who I have certain conversations with about this, but there are 3 QUISPs that are working on a flow chart that independently that we're going to be getting together on to see if we can have a common interpretation of how the process can work. So there would be some consistency, as something that Steve's been talking about, but the flow chart will make it, we hope, really clear what needs to happen before the process, this whole thing can really be working on a regular basis.
Great.
Okay,
I'll just wanted to add like big picture perspective. Kent and I have talked about this a lot, but one of the things that really excited us about this whole new model of the clean water service provider is the ability to build efficiencies into the process of getting a project done. It hasn't, the structure that we've been given has not prepared us to have as much efficiency as we would love in the process. However, it will always be our goal within those parameters that we are given to make it as efficient as possible. So like when Dean talks about, we'll be developing an application process to bring projects into the prioritization process, we're going to make that as simple as we can within the requirements that are passed down to us. So that's always going to be our goal with your help and feedback.
Thank you.
any closing thoughts, questions, or comments that people have? We will get the minutes out. This meeting's been recorded. We will get a link to the meeting video. We will send out a poll regarding the possible next meeting date. We will get together with Peter about the next agenda. Any other closing, we will get working on the blurb that can be used in the different regions, of which there are several when it comes to this basin. Any other questions or thoughts?
Dean, I just had one thought. You said, I think, was it in July, there was going to be a training on Indigenous perspectives. Is that something, do you mind if we share that with, like, we have a JEDI committee, for example, or our equity committees, in case they're interested?
Yeah, I mentioned that as a topic that is on a list that DEC shared. I don't know really anything more about it,
Okay.
but I think that if it's a public presentation, it can be shared. Absolutely. Anyone else? And I think maybe at this point, Catherine, if you want to.
I think you said if I want to look for a motion to adjourn. Okay.
Perhaps.
Unless there's anything further that folks want to add to the meeting.
Only thing I'd like to throw in is it would be wonderful to have a in-person meeting at some point, and I'm certainly not the one that can call that. I think these virtual meetings are great for the type of meeting we're having today, but I'm just looking ahead to this fall when we actually have the projects in our hands and folks will want to be presenting to us for our consideration. And I don't know what your plans are. This is such a spread out basin and some pretty bad roads for getting around in the basin. But I just, I'm very satisfied with the way we're doing things now, but I was just kind of curious if there's a plan.
I'm not the one to ask because I've been out of work. This is almost 3 weeks now where I'm not back to work because I got COVID at a public meeting. So you can have somebody else answer that question.
I would imagine we were, the next few months are going to tell us a lot as far as how easy it is to get together with each other in person. I mean, they lightened things up recently, but who knows what's going to happen? We're always at this huge question mark, crossroads every month. So I'd say by the time of, June or July, we'd probably have a better idea of.
Peter, we've been saying that for 2 years.
Yep, skipping record.
How about a summer outdoor gathering?
Yeah, outdoor gatherings I could easily foresee. We could use our nature center.
There you go.
Yeah, we got new picnic tables that we're putting in, 3 new ones. So, I'd be more than, we want to keep have more meetings out there actually. So it's just a bit of a drive. It's in the middle of nowhere, but hey.
Especially in summer, that's nice. And maybe if we move to in-person meetings, we could do select meetings that are longer because it's easier to do longer meetings in person. More than 2 hours on Zoom gets too much. So If we're
I
going
was
to
just
try.
thinking when it's time to actually present a project, when we actually, start digging in, I'm thinking the presenters would really appreciate a personal appearance as opposed to this mode. That was my only concern.
Lauren, you want to jump into?
Totally different topic, just circling back. And I don't know if this is illegal or not, but does it make sense to talk to some of our engineering friends and make sure that like the procurement system or the RFQ is like that system that we build isn't a burden on them if possible? I know that like automatically kind of says which engineers we know and like already, but feels like they're the ones who are going to fill it out.
So
Peter.
Lauren, I feel like we were already going through that procurement system with all of engineers, and the ones I've worked with have already been pre-qualified through the DEC in the block grants and whatnot. So I don't know if this is going to be much of anything new to anyone really, unless they're an engineering firm that you've never worked with, obviously. But yeah.
And both Chittenden RPC and our RPC do a pre-qualification process. And I think we have a dozen engineering firms that are pre-qualified already in our existing system, which we will have to redo for the Clean Water Service Provider. But we already set up a model where Chittenden usually goes first and we go a few months later. So I always model our RFQ exactly like theirs, so the firms can reuse everything they already did. So we try to make it as streamlined and efficient as possible.
I think, Lauren, that we have to be careful about giving the firms the sense that they're going to shape the process, because we don't want to create a conflict of interest. But I would imagine there could be a sole proprietorship engineering firm somewhere in Franklin County that hasn't been through this process before, but they may be well suited to do a certain part of your program. And we just need to make sure they understand the steps and that they take part in it. It shouldn't be onerous on them, but they just have to get used to the idea of doing it, and they have to do it. And they may not have done it before, and so it will be new.
And certainly, like Steve noted, and Peter, and you all have firms or sole proprietors or groups that you work with already. And so when we do this process formally, everything you can do to make sure they're aware of the opportunity will be really helpful.
I think we'll probably get into muddy waters more with contractors who implement rather than engineering firms.
Yeah.
I think that's where, because there's so many contractors, and some do really good work, and some I've done for smaller works that I didn't require bids, but I have no idea if they're pre-qualified really, because it was a small process. They did a good job, but then we get to the next stage and they're like, "Oop, maybe not," so yeah, that's where it's going to get kind of muddy.
Jumping again, I'm just curious, what do you mean by Zoom norms, Lauren?
Just like, let's all raise our hand if we want to talk versus just unmuting, or when do we use the chat versus make sure it's audibly heard. So kind of like an accessibility, making sure we're not talking over each other. I am an extrovert, in case no one has noticed yet. So I'm happy to just jump in, but I also know that sometimes I can take up a lot of space in a room. And so just trying to build systems and norms around that kind of thing. And like having your video on if you can, or we accept that your video's off. Just being very transparent about those types of things.
Thanks.
Speaking of which, Peter, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think that should be the norm. And I feel guilty for just jumping in, but I think we should be using those devices to make it equitable, and organized. And that could be something we could vote upon, I guess, at some point, but not today.
And certainly it's something you as chair could
Yep.
lay out as your expectation.
I would propose that as chair, that we use these devices in order to have an order of who's going to speak when. And could I make a motion to do so, or ask someone to make a motion? Yes?
I would just say you'd probably need a training too, if you're gonna make that motion.
Yeah? All right, well, then another day.
Dick?
If we're gonna call them norms, then we wouldn't vote on it. If we voted on it, we'd be beyond norms. So if we want to use norms, we should just accept them and go on.
How does that sit with the rest of the group? See Peter nodding his head yes and thumbs up and okay, great. Well, that was easy. Anything else before we wrap up? All right, so we've got a couple of things to get Dean comments on, thinking about an in-person meeting sometime in the future, looking at scheduling our upcoming meetings. And thank you all so much for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, take care, everyone.
We didn't vote to